Imagine stepping back tens of thousands of years into a world locked in ice. The air is thin and sharp, cutting against the lungs with every breath. Snow lies heavy on the ground, not just for days or weeks, but for months on end. The sky is often gray, dimming the light of the sun, while storms sweep across the open plains without warning. This was the setting of the Ice Age, a time when early humans struggled not only against predators or rival clans, but against the greatest enemy of all, the cold itself. For modern people, winter is a season marked by comfort. We wrap ourselves in woolen blankets, sip hot drinks, and light fires at the flick of a switch. But for prehistoric men and women, there were no warm houses, no electricity, no stored food in cupboards. Winter was not cozy. It was terrifying. Each night brought uncertainty. Would the fire hold until morning? Would the cave keep the wind away? Would the clan wake to see another sunrise? Or would the cold claim another life? This documentary begins at the heart of that fear. To survive in a world where temperatures could fall far below freezing, our ancestors had to master the art of resilience. They relied on instinct, invention, and the bonds of their community. Without fire, they froze. Without food, they starved. Without each other, they perished. Yet somehow, despite the endless hardships, humans endured. Picture a small clan huddled in a cave at night. The fire burns low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Children cling to their mothers, wrapped in skins pulled tightly around their fragile bodies. Outside, the wind howls like a living creature, rattling branches and sweeping snow into drifts that grow higher by the hour. In the distance, the echo of a wolf's call breaks the silence, a reminder that other hungry beings roam in the darkness. The night is long, and every hour must be endured. But there is also warmth here, not only from the flames, but from the people themselves. Survival is not only about tools or fire. It is about belonging. Each member of the clan depends on the others. The hunter depends on the firekeeper. The mother depends on the gatherer. The elder depends on the youth who listen and learn. Alone, none would last long. Together, they carry the fragile flame of humanity forward into the next day. The story of how cavemen survived the coldest nights of the Ice Age is not just about science or archaeology. It is about the raw, beating heart of human experience. It is about fear and courage, hunger and generosity, despair and hope. The cold pressed against them at every moment, yet they press back, with fire, with shelter, with the unbreakable will to live. This journey will take us through their world. The frozen landscapes, the ingenious shelters, the hunts that fed entire clans, and the rituals that gave meaning to their struggle. We will uncover how they clothed themselves in animal skins, how they slept through nights when the air itself seemed to bite, and how they shared the last scraps of food so that no one would be left behind. Every choice mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between survival and extinction. As we begin, imagine standing barefoot on frozen earth, the chill sinking deep into your bones. Imagine no modern protection. Only what you can carry, only what you can build, only what your small community can provide. The Ice Age strips away all illusions. There is no luxury, no safety net, no second chance. What remains is the essence of humanity, courage, creativity, and above all, the power of cooperation. This is the story of the caveman's winter, a story of life balanced on the edge of extinction, a story of fire in the snow, a story of how the weakest creatures on Earth, armed with little more than stone tools and fragile bodies, outlasted the giants of their time and stepped into the future. It all begins in the frozen silence of the Ice Age night, when survival was never guaranteed, but always fought for. The Ice Age was not a single moment frozen in time. It was an age of shifting extremes, of advancing glaciers, bitter winds, and landscapes that could both nurture and destroy. For the caveman, nature was never neutral. It was a constant test, a force that gave with one hand and took with the other. To survive, humans had to read the land like a book, learning when it would shelter them and when it would crush them beneath its cold indifference. Picture the world as it was. Vast ice sheets stretched across much of Europe, Asia, and North America, covering valleys and mountains alike beneath walls of frozen silence. Rivers slowed, froze, and sometimes disappeared beneath the weight of snow. Summers were short, often too brief to yield much harvest of berries or roots, and winters dragged on with merciless length. Entire ecosystems shifted to adapt, leaving only the strongest, hardiest plants and animals clinging to existence. The plains, though harsh, offered promise. Herds of mammoth, bison, and reindeer moved slowly across open tundra, leaving trails in the snow that hunters could follow for days. For the caveman, these animals were both life and danger. Their meat provided food, their hides warmth, their bones tools. Yet approaching them without skill meant death. Nature provided, but only to those daring enough to take its challenge. In the forest, the story was different. Pines and birches resisted the cold, their branches groaning under the weight of ice. Hidden within the trees, smaller animals survived the winters. Hares, foxes, and birds. For a starving clan, these were precious prizes, but catching them required cunning, patience, and knowledge passed down through generations. The forest was a sanctuary, but it was also a trap. Predators waited there too, wolves, bears, and the silent, patient lynx. For every meal the caveman hunted, another creature might be hunting him. Water was another paradox. Glacial melt carved rivers and lakes, offering fresh drinking water and sometimes fish, a rare gift in a frozen diet. But those same rivers could flood suddenly when ice broke, sweeping away camps and people alike. To live near water was to accept both blessing and threat. Even the sky itself was unpredictable. Storms could rise with little warning, burying shelters beneath drifts of snow and plunging temperatures to levels no fire could easily withstand. A sudden change in wind could turn a hunting ground into a frozen wasteland. To live in this world was to remain alert always, to sense the signs nature offered, the movement of birds, the shifting clouds, the tracks of animals across snow. Yet within this brutality lay opportunity. The very conditions that seemed designed to end human life also forced human ingenuity. The cold demanded fire, so fire was tamed. The open plains demanded tools, so stone and bone were shaped into weapons. The scarcity of food demanded cooperation, so clans became tightly bound units where trust was as vital as air. Nature shaped the caveman not by kindness, but by challenge. And in that challenge, humanity was forged stronger. But the land was never fully conquered. For every successful hunt, there was a storm that killed. For every warm shelter, there was a night where the cold crept in and claimed the weakest. The Ice Age reminded man constantly of his fragility. Unlike the mammoth or the bear, humans had no natural armor, no thick fur, no sharp claws. Their only defense was knowledge, memory, and a willingness to adapt. Imagine standing at the edge of a glacier, as a caveman might have done. The ice wall towers above, a frozen giant gleaming blue and white under the pale sun. The sound is not silence, but groaning, the slow cracking of ice as it shifts, alive in its own way. At your feet, the land is barren, stripped of plants, lifeless except for the faint tracks of passing animals. It is a place both awe-inspiring and terrifying, beautiful and deadly. This was the stage upon which human survival played out. Nature was both the setting and the antagonist, a relentless force that tested every generation. And yet, paradoxically, it was also the provider. The mammoth offered food. The reindeer provided hides. The forest gave wood for fire. The river carried fish. To curse the cold was to misunderstand it. For the caveman, there was no choice but to accept the duality of the land. Every danger came with possibility, every hardship with hidden gifts. And so clans moved with the rhythm of this world. They followed the herds across frozen plains. They built shelters against the howling winds. They prayed to the spirits of animals and the land itself, hoping to earn favor in a world that gave nothing freely. They learned that nature was not an enemy to be defeated, but a force to be endured, respected, and, when possible, partnered with. This was the Ice Age landscape, a world of extremes, where survival meant balance. It was not enough to fight the land. One had to learn its language, to hear its warnings, to seize its offerings before they vanished. In this frozen theater of life and death, humanity learned resilience, patience, and above all, the power of adaptation. Nature shaped man, and in shaping him, prepared him for the long road toward the future. For prehistoric humans, few things were as sacred or as vital as fire. In the endless winters of the Ice Age, fire was more than light and warmth. It was life itself. To lose it meant more than cold fingers and shivering bodies. It meant death within hours, starvation without cooked food, and vulnerability to predators waiting in the dark. Fire was survival distilled into a single fragile flame. Imagine the moment the first spark caught, perhaps struck by stone against stone, or drawn from embers carefully carried between camps. The dry grass smolders, a faint thread of smoke rising into the frozen air. Hands cup around it desperately. Breath feeds it gently, and then, suddenly, flame erupts. The small blaze grows with crackles. Shadows dance across cave walls. In that instant, the world changes. The cold retreats. Predators hesitate at the edge of light, and the clan gathers closer. Fear loosens its grip, replaced by the fragile comfort of warmth. But keeping fire alive was never simple. The Ice Age wind was merciless, able to snuff out flames in seconds. Rain and snow threatened to drench embers. For many clans, fire was not something made daily. It was something preserved. Burning logs were carried from place to place, glowing coals wrapped in bark and moss to smolder through journeys. Firekeepers, often women or elders, took on the sacred duty of tending the flames, waking at night to feed them, never letting the camp fall into darkness. Losing fire was a catastrophe. Archaeological evidence suggests clans may have traveled long distances to find neighbors who still held flame, begging or trading to relight what was lost. Others struggled to create fire from scratch, using flint to strike sparks or friction between wood to coax heat into flame. These methods required skill, patience, and luck. A failed attempt meant wasted time, wasted energy, and the creeping advance of frostbite. Fire transformed not just the body, but the mind. Around its glow, people told stories, passing down myths and knowledge that became the fabric of culture. Shadows on cave walls became the canvases of imagination. Firelight gave humans more than safety. It gave them evenings, time beyond daylight hours to plan hunts, repair tools, and bond as a community. The day no longer ended with the setting sun. Fire stretched time itself. Cooking was another revolution. Raw meat, often tough and filled with parasites, became safer and more digestible when roasted. Plants that were nearly inedible became edible with heat. Fire unlocked calories otherwise lost, strengthening clans through long winters. A single blaze could mean the difference between starvation and survival. With every meal prepared by flame, the body grew stronger, and so too did the human species. Yet fire also shaped social life. It demanded cooperation, gathering wood, guarding embers, ensuring safety. It drew people together physically, forcing them into close proximity where warmth and conversation were shared. To sit by the fire was to be part of the group. Those on the edge, too far from the circle, felt not just the cold but also isolation. Fire became a symbol of belonging, but there was always danger. A flame too large could consume a shelter. Sparks could catch on furs or wooden supports. Children could stumble too close. burns marking them for life. Fire was powerful, but it demanded respect. To misuse it was to invite disaster. To honor it was to ensure the clan's survival. The psychological impact of fire cannot be overstated. To a creature surrounded by endless darkness, knowing that predators stalked unseen, the glow of fire was more than light. It was reassurance, a promise of safety. The howling winds outside could be ignored if the flames danced brightly within. The cold claws of winter could be beaten back, at least for a time. Fire transformed fear into courage, despair into hope. Across cultures, fire became sacred. Some archaeologists suggest that early rituals may have been performed around flames, with dances, chants, and offerings made to mysterious power that seemed alive, hungry, and eternal. Fire demanded feeding, just as humans did. It grew when nurtured and died when neglected. It consumed but also gave life. In fire, prehistoric humans may have seen not just survival, but spirit. Imagine again the night deep in an ice age winter. Snow falls outside, wolves prowl unseen. The air is bitter and sharp. Inside the cave, flames leap and crackle. The clan gathers close, shadows flickering on the walls. Children drift asleep, wrapped in furs, warmed by fire and the breath of family around them. Hunters sharpen spears in the glow. Elders whisper stories that carry memory across generations. The fire holds them together. Without it, they are scattered, cold, and afraid. With it, they are a people enduring against the storm. Fire was not merely an invention. It was the beating heart of survival, the fragile thread between life and death. It was the most precious treasure a clan could possess, a treasure guarded fiercely, honored deeply, and carried forward across centuries. In its glow, humanity found the strength to survive the coldest nights, and in its warmth, they discovered the beginnings of civilization itself. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, warmth alone was not enough. Fire could keep the cold at bay, but without shelter, its glow was quickly stolen by the wind. A blaze in the open air could flicker bravely, but the storm would always win. For prehistoric humans, shelter was not simply a matter of comfort. It was a matter of survival. The body could endure hunger for days, thirst for hours, but exposure to the cold, without protection, could end life in a single night. It was inside stone walls, under animal hides, or beneath carefully built structures of bone and snow that humanity carved out its refuge against the endless winter. The first and most natural shelters were caves. They were gifts of the earth, ready-made sanctuaries carved by time and weather, offering protection from wind, snow, and predators alike. Stepping into a cave during a storm must have felt like crossing a threshold between two worlds. Outside, the gale screamed across the plains, snow cut like knives through the air, and survival seemed impossible. Inside, the stone held a stillness, broken only by the crackle of fire and the whispers of the clan. Caves were not always welcoming, of course. They were often home to bears, lions, or hyenas, and claiming them was no small task. A cave could be both fortress and battleground, but once secured, it became the heart of a community. Archaeological sites showed traces of fires built in central hearths, with sleeping areas arranged along the walls, the soot of ancient smoke still staining ceilings after tens of thousands of years. These blackened marks are silent witnesses to the desperate nights when human lives clung to firelight within stone walls. But caves were not always available, and not every landscape offered such protection. When the clan found themselves on open plains, among frozen rivers or treeless tundra, they had to create shelter with their own hands. It was here that ingenuity was tested. Bones of great beasts became walls and supports. The mammoth, so dangerous in life, offered salvation in death. Its ribs, tusks, and massive skulls were arranged in the frames upon which hides were stretched. Archaeologists have uncovered circular structures made from mammoth bones, covered with furs. Their remains still scattered in the soil of Eastern Europe. Imagine the labor required. Hunting or scavenging the carcass of such an immense creature, hauling its bones across the snow, arranging them into a dome strong enough to withstand the wind. Inside these huts, fire could be lit, warmth retained, and families huddled together as storms raged outside. The ingenuity of these bone shelters speaks to the desperation of their makers, but also to their unyielding determination to carve life out of a hostile world. Snow itself could become a tool, just as the Inuit of later times learned to shape blocks of ice into igloos. Early humans in the Ice Age may have carved shelters from snowdrifts or burrowed into the white ground for insulation. Snow, though cold, held heat better than open air, trapping body warmth and firelight within its walls. To crouch inside such a shelter was to hide within the very element that threatened to kill, turning the enemy into an unlikely ally. This paradox, using snow against the snow, showed how deeply humans learned to adapt to what nature gave them. Forests offered other solutions. Where it was available, branches and trunks became supports for lean-tos and huts. Bark was stripped and laid across roofs. Pine boughs created bedding that insulated against frozen ground. These shelters were not meant to last years, but nights and weeks, enough time for a clan to rest, hunt, and then move on with the seasons. Mobility was as much a necessity as permanence. Building a shelter that could be abandoned was often wiser than building one too heavy to leave behind. To survive meant to balance effort with necessity, strength with opportunity. Inside the shelter, life condensed into a small circle. The fire in the center glowed, its smoke venting through cracks in the roof or drifting upward into the dark mouth of a cave. Around it, skins were spread on the ground, softening the hardness of earth or stone. Children slept closest to the warmth, shielded by parents and elders. Hunters rested with spears at arm's reach, ready for sudden dangers. The walls rattled with wind, snow fell heavy on roofs, but inside there was a sense of safety, however fragile. These places were not homes in the modern sense, filled with possessions and comfort. They were shelters in the purest meaning of the word, barriers between life and death. Yet within these shelters, community was forged. Stories were told in their shadows. Laughter echoed softly in the glow, and the rituals of survival became daily rhythms. The act of building together, carrying bones, lifting hides, arranging stones, tied people to one another. A shelter was never the work of one alone. It was a creation of many hands, the symbol of a group bound by shared need. And in that way, the walls of the shelter enclosed not just bodies, but the spirit of cooperation. There were failures, too. Shelters collapsed beneath heavy snow. Fires grew too hot and burned the very hides meant to protect. Predators sometimes found their way inside, dragging off the weakest. No structure was unbreakable, no refuge absolute. The caveman lived with constant uncertainty, never knowing if the next storm would be the last. And yet, they rebuilt. Every failure became lesson. Every collapse became knowledge, passed on to the next attempt, the next generation. Slowly, across millennia, the art of building improved, as did the resilience of those who built. The psychology of shelter was as important as the structure itself. To have walls, even fragile ones, gave hope. To see the firelight reflecting on stone or hide was to feel protected, even if danger still lurked outside. For the human mind, that fragile sense of safety was fuel as vital as food or warmth. It allowed sleep, it allowed planning, it allowed the clan to wake stronger than they had slept. The importance of shelter cannot be measured only in terms of physical survival. It must also be understood as emotional survival, the invisible shield it gave to weary souls in the endless cold. And so, across the Ice Age world, the story of human shelters unfolded in countless forms. Caves blackened with soot, bone huts rising like strange monuments on the tundra, Snow burrows dug into frozen banks. Lean-tos hidden beneath the canopy of pines. Each structure whispered of a struggle against the storm, a desperate refusal to surrender to the cold. Each spoke of hands working together, of fire lit in darkness, of humanity's will to endure. Shelter was not simply a place to rest. It was a symbol as important as fire, as essential as food. It represented the triumph of human ingenuity over the indifference of nature. It was a fragile barrier that separated life from the endless winter night. And within those walls, stone, bone, wood, or snow, the story of survival continued, one storm at a time. Fire was not just warm for the cavemen. It was life itself, the thin line between survival and freezing death. In the heart of winter, when the sun was too weak to offer comfort and icy winds tore across the land, the flicker of firelight symbolized safety, community, and continuity. The ability to create, maintain, and protect fire was as sacred as any ritual, and it demanded skill, patience, and understanding of nature's fragile balance. Fire was more than heat. It was a shield against predators, a means to cook otherwise indigestible food, a signal for communication, and a spiritual symbol tied to life and renewal. The struggle for fire began with the knowledge of ignition. Early humans discovered sparks through friction, striking stones like flint against each other, or through the careful twisting of wooden drills that heated fibers until they glowed. These methods were painstakingly slow, often taking hours, and in the biting cold, failure could mean death. Thus, fire was rarely allowed to go out. Embers were treasured like jewels, wrapped in dry moss or bark, and carried along during migrations to ensure that flame would be reborn wherever the clan settled. The firekeeper's role was therefore vital, an appointed guardian whose duty was to feed and protect the flames throughout the night. To fall asleep and allow the fire to die could doom the entire group. Once burning, fire transformed the environment. Cavemen huddled around it to share warmth, their shadows dancing on cave walls, their faces illuminated in soft, golden light. Fire extended the day, giving them hours to craft tools, repair clothing, and tell stories. It also provided psychological relief, banishing the vast darkness of the Ice Age nights that otherwise carried silence pierced only by the howls of wolves or the crunch of unseen footsteps. Around fire, fear gave way to a sense of unity, and conversations often blended with rituals, storytelling, and the passing down of ancestral wisdom. Fire was both a tool and a teacher, instilling discipline in those who tended it and awe in those who witnessed its unpredictable power. The practical uses of fire were equally transformative. Meat roasted over flames became easier to chew and digest, unlocking calories crucial for survival in an environment where every ounce of energy counted. Bones softened in heat, allowing marrow to be extracted, offering fats and proteins otherwise inaccessible. Fire also allowed the crafting of better tools. Hardening wooden spears in flames made them sharper and more durable. Smoke from the fire drove insect away and preserved food, while its glow deterred many predators, from cave lions to hyenas. In every aspect of life, whether it was cooking, protection, or innovation, fire enhanced survival and gave humanity an edge over the elements. Yet, fire was also a force of danger. A single spark on dry grass could spread uncontrollably, threatening shelters and food supplies. The balance of respecting fire while harnessing it became a central part of prehistoric wisdom. Many tribes wove this duality into their beliefs. Fire could give life, but it could also take it away. Rituals often emerge around fire, where clans would dance, chant, or leave offerings to acknowledge its power. To many, fire symbolized the sun's strength carried down to earth, a divine gift that allowed humans to thrive even when the world seemed hostile and frozen. On long winter nights, the fire was rarely left unguarded. Elders told stories by its glow, tales of ancestors, spirits, and lessons of survival. Children, huddled in furs, listened with wide eyes, associating the crackle of fire with the voice of memory and tradition. The flames provided rhythm to life. Mornings began with its rekindling. Evenings ended with its steady watch. To lose fire in the dead of winter was calamity, driving desperate groups to seek help from neighboring clans, forging bonds of cooperation, or sparking conflict over access to flame. Fire thus shaped not only the environment but also human relationships, acting as both a bond and a source of tension between communities. In essence, fire was the first technology, the first companion beyond flesh and bone that stood by humans in their battle against the Ice Age. It represented mastery over nature, yet demanded humility in return. It connected generations, inspired rituals, and transformed caves into homes. Without fire, winter was death. With fire, winter became a challenge, a trial that could be endured and overcome. If fire was the heart of survival, clothing was the skin that shielded early humans from a merciless bite of winter. Against the icy winds and heavy snow of the Ice Age, naked flesh was utterly vulnerable. Unlike many animals, humans lacked thick fur or insulating fat layers. Forcing them to innovate, clothing became a second skin, crafted from the bodies of the very creatures they hunted. It was both a practical necessity and a symbol of ingenuity, a way to adapt to an environment that could kill within hours if left unguarded. The first forms of protection were simple: animal hides draped loosely over the body. These primitive coverings offered warmth, but they were heavy, stiff, and difficult to move in. Over time, humans learned to soften skins through methods of scraping, stretching, and even chewing the hides to break down fibers. Fat and animal brains were sometimes rubbed into the leather to create pliability, transforming crude coverings into garments that could bend, fold, and wrap more comfortably. With these advances came mobility, and with mobility came survival. Winter clothing evolved into layered ensembles designed to trap heat. Inner layers were made from softer furs, fox, hare, or squirrel, while outer layers were stitched from tougher hides like reindeer or mammoth, offering both insulation and wind resistance. Sewing became one of the most revolutionary skills of the prehistoric world. Needles crafted from bone and awls made from sharpened antlers allowed hides to be pierced and joined with sinew thread. This breakthrough meant clothing could now be tailored rather than just wrapped, hugging the body closely and sealing in warmth. For children, garments were made tighter to prevent heat loss, while hunters often wore looser outfits that allowed freedom of movement during pursuit. But clothing was not only about warmth. It was also armor against hazards. Thick hides shielded the body from sharp ice, abrasive stone, and the claws or teeth of predators during hunts. Fur-lined boots allowed cavemen to walk across snow without frostbite, while mittens or hand wraps preserved dexterity in freezing temperatures. Head coverings, caps of fur, or hoods sewn into cloaks, were especially vital, as much body heat is lost through the scalp. In a world where exposure could kill faster than hunger, every stitch and seam mattered. Clothing also carried cultural meaning. Decorative elements, such as beads made from bone or teeth, were sewn into hides not just for beauty, but to signify identity, clan membership, or status. Hunters who felled dangerous beasts often wore their pelts as trophies, a visual reminder of their skill and bravery. In this sense, clothing was both functional and symbolic, providing warmth while telling the story of survival and success. During rituals, special garments might be worn, combining fur, feathers, or painted designs, transforming the human body into a living canvas of expression and belief. The preparation of clothing was a communal effort. Women often led the processing of hides, while men hunted the animals whose skins would later be transformed. Children assisted by scraping fat from pelts or gathering sinew for thread. This process reinforced cooperation and shared purpose, turning survival into a collective endeavor. On cold nights, families huddled under shared furs, layering warmth not only from hides but from each other. This closeness created bonds as strong as the stitches that bound their clothing. The technology of clothing also expanded into portable shelters. Large hides stretched over wooden frames or bones became windbreaks, tents, and sleeping mats. Combined with fire, these innovations turned bleak caves and icy plains into temporary havens. Some groups carried hides with them during migrations, folding them into packs that could be quickly assembled into protective shelters when night fell. Thus, clothing extended beyond the body. It became a versatile survival tool, adaptable to multiple needs. Psychologically, clothing gave a sense of security. To step outside into the bitter air wrapped in fur was to carry a piece of warmth and familiarity into the unknown. It gave early humans courage to face the wilderness, lessening the terror of exposure. At the same time, it was a reminder of the cycle of life and death. Every stitch of warmth came from the sacrifice of an animal. This relationship fostered respect for the creatures they hunted, often expressed in rituals of gratitude, acknowledging that human survival was built upon the gift of another life. Clothing, like fire, became a bridge between vulnerability and resilience. It allowed humans to extend their range into harsher climates, to survive in places where unprotected bodies would perish. It was an invention born of desperation, but refined through skill, patience, and shared knowledge. Over generations, the passing down of sewing techniques, hide treating methods, and garment designs ensured that each clan stood a better chance against the unforgiving winters. In the silence of the Ice Age night, a hunter wrapped in fur, seated by a crackling fire, embodied the triumph of adaptation. Clothing was no mere covering. It was armor, history, and identity woven into one. Without it, humanity's journey through the coldest chapters of prehistory would have ended in silence. With it, they endured, adapted, and carried their story forward. In the endless winters of the Ice Age, fire and clothing gave warmth, but without shelter, survival was still precarious. The howling winds had cut through layers of fur, and snowstorms could bury the unprepared within minutes. Cavemen understood that finding or creating shelter was not just about comfort. It was about life or death. The shelter was a final barrier between fragile human flesh and a world designed to freeze it solid. Within those walls of stone, bone, or hide, families found safety, warmth, and a sense of belonging. Without them, winter was a merciless executioner. The most immediate refuge came in the form of caves. Natural rock shelters offered protection from the elements and predators alike. They were strong, immovable, and often positioned to shield against the wind. Inside, the temperature remained more stable than the frozen air outside, and with the addition of fire, caves became natural havens. But caves were not always available, and when found, they were often already occupied by bears, lions, or packs of wolves. Taking possession of such a shelter meant risking bloody confrontation. Victories in these battles were remembered for generations, and the animals that once dwelled in those caves sometimes became part of ritualistic symbolism, their presence lingering in the clan stories and paintings on the very walls that had once belonged to beasts. When caves were scarce or too dangerous to claim, early humans turned to ingenuity. They built shelters from the very bones of the animals they hunted. Mammoth bones, tusks, and hides could be arranged into circular structures, forming huts that were sturdy enough to resist the wind and insulate against the cold. These structures were often layered with furs and reinforced with branches, creating homes that could last through entire seasons. Archaeological discoveries on the plains of Eastern Europe reveal evidence of such dwellings, where mammoth skulls formed foundations and tusks were used as supporting beams. These shelters were not only functional but also works of creativity, monuments to resilience in the face of an unforgiving climate. Other shelters were simpler, designed for temporary protection during hunting expeditions or migrations. Lean-tos built from branches, hides, and snow provided quick refuge. Snow itself, when compacted, became an insulator, much like the igloos of later Arctic peoples. By burrowing into drifts or building low snow shelters, early humans could escape the biting wind and preserve body heat. It was a profound lesson in adaptation. using the very elements that threaten survival to construct safety. Inside these shelters, life took on a rhythm shaped by necessity. Fire pits were carefully constructed in the center, smoke venting through cracks or small holes, while families arranged themselves in circles around the warmth. Sleeping areas were lined with furs, with children placed between adults to maximize heat retention. Tools, food, and weapons were stored in specific spots, as organization was not a luxury but a survival strategy. Clutter could mean lost time in a crisis, and in winter, even a moment's delay could prove fatal. The construction and maintenance of shelters were communal efforts. Men might bring in heavy bones or branches, but women and children played equal roles, stretching hides, sealing gaps with mud or snow, and arranging interiors. This shared labor reinforced bonds, teaching every member that survival depended on cooperation. It also instilled discipline. No fire could be left untended, no wall unrepaired, no fur left unshaken of snow. In the harsh winter, neglect was an enemy as dangerous as any predator. Shelters were also spaces of meaning beyond mere survival. They were homes where stories were told, rituals performed, and knowledge passed down. The walls of caves became canvases, painted with images of hunts, animals, and abstract patterns. These were not idle decorations. They were acts of memory, ways of making sense of a hostile world. To paint a mammoth on the wall was to claim mastery over in spirit, even if the hunt remained perilous in flesh. To trace handprints in ochre was to declare presence, proof that in a world dominated by cold and silence, humans had endured and left their mark. The psychological importance of shelter cannot be overstated. To step inside a cave, hut, or snow shelter was to step out of chaos and into a fragile pocket of order. The storm might rage outside, wolves might prowl beyond the light, but within the shelter there was warmth, companionship, and illusion, sometimes a reality, of safety. This mental refuge was as crucial as a physical one, sustaining hope through the darkest nights of the year. For children, the shelter was their entire world, the space where they learned, played, and absorbed the lessons of survival that would one day save their own lives. But not all shelters were permanent. The Ice Age demanded movement, as herds migrated and resources shifted. For nomadic groups, shelters had to be portable. Hide tents stretched over wooden frames could be dismantled and carried on long journeys, then rebuilt at new camps. These mobile homes allowed clans to follow the rhythm of the seasons, never lingering too long in one place lest resources be exhausted. Such mobility required planning, strength, and unity. A poorly built shelter during migration could mean frostbite, sickness, or death before the night was through. Shelter also defined social structure. In larger caves, families divided spaces with hides, creating boundaries for privacy, storage, or ritual. In constructed huts, proximity often reflected social bonds. Elders placed at the warmest spots, hunters near entrances, children protected in the center. These arrangements created an unspoken hierarchy, one shaped by experience, strength, and need. Shelter was therefore not only a defense against nature, but also a mirror of society itself, reflecting both cooperation and order. There were times, however, when even the best shelters failed. Roofs collapsed under snow, winds tore through gaps, and fires consumed entire huts. In those moments, survival demanded speed, grabbing essentials, rallying the clan, and fleeing into the frozen unknown. The memory of such disasters became cautionary tales, warnings passed down, so that future generations would build stronger, smarter, safer. Failure was a teacher as much as success, etched into the traditions of survival. In the grand story of human endurance, shelters stand as silent monuments to resilience. They were not castles of stone or towers of glory. They were simple, fragile, temporary places. Yet within them, the seeds of civilization took root. They allowed humans to endure winters that would have otherwise claimed them, to create spaces where families grew, where ideas blossomed, and where the first sparks of culture glowed. From the humble caves of prehistoric clans to the mighty cities of later ages, all human dwellings trace their lineage to those first desperate attempts to keep the cold at bay. For the cavemen, shelter was never guaranteed, always fragile and often fought for. But in building them, humanity declared its defiance of the cold and chaos of the Ice Age. With walls of stone, bone, and hide, they carved small islands of warmth and light in a frozen sea of darkness. And within those fragile walls, the story of human survival was written one winter at a time. In the heart of winter, food was as precious as fire. The land was barren, plants hidden under snow, and rivers locked in ice. Hunting became not only the main source of sustenance, but also the center of prehistoric life. A ritual, a necessity, and often a gamble with death. For cavemen, each hunt was a test of skill, courage, and endurance. To succeed meant survival. To fail meant hunger, weakness, and possibly the slow extinction of an entire clan. Winter hunts were shaped by the season's harsh realities. Animals were hard to find, their movements unpredictable as they sought scarce grazing grounds. Some herds migrated south, leaving behind only the strongest or most desperate stragglers. Predators, too, prowled more boldly in winter, competing with humans for the same prey. Wolves, lions, and even other clans were rivals on the frozen plains. Every hunt was therefore a contest, not only against the prey, but against nature and other hunters who shared the same desperate hunger. The first strategy was tracking. Snow became both a challenge and an ally, recording the footprints of beasts across the landscape. Hunters learned to read the signs, the depth of track, revealing the animal's size and weight, the pattern of movement hinting at speed or injury, broken branches, tufts of fur, and even the direction of frost disturbed on the grass gave clues. To follow these trails demanded patience, silence, and almost spiritual connection to the land. For hours or even days, hunters shadowed their quarry, conserving energy while waiting for the right moment to strike. Weapons were simple, yet deadly. Wooden spears hardened in fire, stone-tipped javelins, and heavy clubs formed the arsenal. The bow and arrow would arrive much later in human history. For Ice Age hunters, success relied on strength, coordination, and numbers. Hunts were cooperative affairs. Individuals alone rarely stood a chance against large game. Groups formed into teams, each member assigned a role. Trackers, drivers to steer the herd, and spear throwers positioned for kill. This teamwork was vital not only for catching prey, but for survival during encounters with predators that might turn the hunters into the hunted. Ambush tactics were common. Hunters used the landscape to their advantage, driving herds toward cliffs, bogs, or narrow passes where the animals could be trapped. Some groups dug pits, camouflaging them with branches and snow, then lured prey toward them. Others coordinated chases, using noise, fire, or even dogs, early companions in hunting, to herd animals into kill zones. These strategies required planning, communication, and bravery, for the hunted animals were not passive victims. Mammoths, bison, and aurochs could trample hunters with ease, and even a wounded deer might lash out fatally. Each hunt carried risk, and every scar on a hunter's body told a story of that peril. The rewards, however, were immense. A single mammoth could feed an entire clan for weeks, providing meat, fat, and marrow that sustained bodies through the cold. Its hide became clothing, its bones shelter, its tusks tools and ornaments. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal was integrated into the fabric of survival. Smaller hunts for deer, boar, or hares provided less bounty but were more frequent and less dangerous. Traps and snares set near burrows or game trails added variety to the diet, supplementing the great hunts with more reliable small catches. Hunting was not just a physical act, but also a mental and spiritual one. Many clans conducted rituals before the hunt, painting their bodies, singing chants, or offering symbolic gestures to the spirits of the animals. Success was believed to depend on respect as much as skill. Killing without acknowledgement risked angering the spirits, leading to scarcity or disaster. These beliefs helped maintain balance, reminding hunters that they were not masters but participants in the cycle of life and death. In this way, hunting was both survival strategy and sacred ceremony. The hunt also shaped social bonds. It was a proving ground for young men, a test of bravery and strength that marked their passage into adulthood. Success in the hunt elevated status, granting prestige and leadership. At the same time, sharing the meat afterward was a powerful act of unity. Hunters did not keep the best cuts of themselves. The prey was divided according to need. Elders and children fed first. This ensured the survival of the group and reinforced the principle that no individual could endure the winter alone. Winter hunting, however, was relentless in its challenges. Frostbite stiffened fingers, making weapon use difficult. Snow slowed movement, and hunger weakened the body. Many hunts ended in exhaustion rather than triumph. The line between predator and prey blurred. Wolves often shadowed hunting parties, waiting for a mistake to strike. A failed hunt did not just mean empty stomachs. It meant lost energy, wasted time, and an increased risk of illness or death. Hunters learned to calculate risk carefully, choosing when to pursue and when to conserve their strength for another day. Over time, hunting shaped the very evolution of humans. The cooperation it required strengthened social bonds and communication, fueling the development of language and strategy. The physical demands honed endurance, coordination, and intelligence. The challenges sharpened creativity, leading to better tools, improved weapons, and more complex tactics. Hunting was not just about food. It was a crucible in which human resilience and ingenuity were forged. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, the sight of hunters moving across the snow, spears in hand, was a symbol of humanity's defiance. They were small figures in a vast hostile landscape, yet through unity, cunning, and courage, they carved out survival. Every successful hunt was a victory against the cold, the hunger, and the chaos of nature. And every fire lit with fresh meat roasting over was proof that, despite all odds, the human story would continue. If hunting was the art of obtaining food, preservation was the science of keeping it. For cavemen, survival in winter was not secured by a single successful hunt, but by the ability to stretch that success across weeks or even months of scarcity. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, hunger was always stalking, always pressing against the thin walls of safety. To eat well one night and starve the next was the rhythm of existence, unless clans learned to prepare, store, and ration. Food preservation became a quiet battle against decay, rot, and waste. A battle fought with ingenuity, patience, and deep respect for every piece of meat won from the wild. The first ally in this struggle was the cold itself. Nature provided a vast freezer, where snow and ice could preserve meat for weeks. Hunters would bury cuts deep into snowbanks or hang them from trees, safe from scavengers and out of reach of wolves. In caves, icy crevices became storage rooms, with temperatures low enough to slow decay, but stable enough to prevent spoilage. The Ice Age environment itself thus shaped human survival strategies, teaching that the very force threatening to kill them, the cold, could also be harnessed as protection. But winter could be unpredictable. Thaws and sudden weather changes could spoil food left unguarded. To prevent waste, cavemen developed additional methods. Smoking meat over fire was one of the earliest techniques. Strips of meat hung above the flames absorbed smoke and heat, drying them out and coating them with preservative compounds. This process not only extended shelf life, but also added flavor and made meat lighter, easier to carry during migrations. Similarly, drying meat in the open air, where wind stripped away moisture, created long-lasting provisions. These dried rations became crucial for hunters traveling far from camp, where fresh kills were uncertain. Fat, too, became a cornerstone of preservation. Rendered into tallow, it could be stored in containers made from bone or hide. Sometimes pieces of meat were submerged in fat, creating an airtight seal that kept out bacteria and extended preservation. Marrow, rich in energy, was stored carefully, often hidden inside bones until it was needed. These methods revealed an instinctive understanding of chemistry and biology, even if the cavemen themselves described it not in scientific terms, but in practical wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Preservation was not only about methods, but also about discipline. Food had to be rationed, divided carefully among clan members. The best cuts often went to children, elders, and hunters whose strength was essential for future hunts. Bones were cracked open long after the flesh was eaten, yielding marrow and grease that could be boiled into broth. Nothing was wasted. Tendons became thread, stomachs and bladders turned into storage containers, and scraps were fed to dogs, who in return aided in hunting. In this cycle, preservation extended beyond food itself. It was about preserving energy, effort, and a fragile balance of survival. Scarcity, however, was never far away. There were winters when hunts failed, when stored provisions ran out too soon, and when bellies ached for days. In such times, clans turned to desperate measures. They dug for roots beneath the snow, scavenged carcasses left by predators, and chewed on hides boiled until soft enough to release some nourishment. These acts of desperation were not daily norms, but seasonal crises, reminders of the thin line between sufficiency and starvation. The stories of these lean winters, when families survived on scraps, became lessons etched into memory, warnings to the young to never waste, to always prepare when times were good. Food scarcity shaped psychology as much as behavior. The fear of hunger drove caution, foresight, and rituals of gratitude. Every kill was celebrated not with arrogance, but with reverence, for it meant more than meat. It meant life, continuity, and hope. Clans often performed rituals before storing food, thanking the animal spirit for its sacrifice and asking that it protect the meat from spoilage. These ceremonies were as practical as they were spiritual, binding the community together in shared responsibility. To waste food was to dishonor the animal, and to dishonor the animal was to risk angering the forces of nature itself. Winter also demanded creativity in combining preserved foods. Soups and stews became staples, as boiling meat with bones, fat, and roots could stretch small portions into meals for many. These warm dishes not only fed bodies but lifted spirits, bringing comfort in the cold. Around firelit shelters, bowls of steaming broth were passed from hand to hand, reinforcing unity and reminding each member that survival was shared, not solitary. Food preservation and scarcity also influenced migration. Clans who stored enough provisions could remain in one place through harsh winters, while those who struggled were forced to move, sometimes into the territories of rivals. These shifts could lead to conflict or to trade, where food was exchanged for tools, hides, or alliances. Scarcity shaped not only the diet, but the very structure of human interaction, linking the survival of one group to the choices and fortunes of others. In many ways, the ability to preserve food marked the difference between mere survival and endurance. It allowed humans to think beyond the immediate day, to plan for weeks, even months ahead. It instilled foresight, discipline, and cooperation, traits that would eventually become the foundation of civilization itself. Without preservation, every winter would have been a gamble, each meal dependent solely on the next hunt. With it, humans gained a measure of control over their fate, however fragile. In the frozen silence of an ice age night, a cache of smoked meat or a pit filled with frozen marrow bones was not just food. It was hope, protection, and a promise that tomorrow might be faced with strength rather than weakness. For cavemen, preservation was a quiet victory that followed the chaos of the hunt, the unseen shield that allowed them to endure the long starvation of winter. And though hunger always lurked at the edges of their lives, these strategies kept it at bay, ensuring that humanity's story continued, bite by bite, winter after winter. In the dim glow of firelight, when shadows danced across the walls of caves, cavemen found themselves staring not only into flicker flames, but also into mysteries they could not explain. Thunder that rolled across the mountains, the sudden death of a healthy hunter, or the appearance of a glowing sky at night. All of these stirred questions far deeper than daily survival. The answers they crafted were not written in books, but etched into ritual, symbol, and whisper belief. Spirituality, for the caveman, was not a luxury. It was a necessity, a way to give meaning to a world that often seemed harsh, unpredictable, and alive with forces greater than themselves. One of the earliest forms of spiritual expression came in the reverence of animals. For hunter-gatherers, animals were more than food. They were beings with spirits, powerful presences that demanded respect. To kill a bison or a mammoth was not just an act of survival. It was a dialogue with forces unseen. Many clans believed that the spirit of the animal lived on even after death, watching the hunters, judging their behavior. This belief gave rise to rituals performed before and after hunts. Hunters would paint images of animals on cave walls, not merely as art, but as offerings, asking permission or forgiveness. These paintings, found today in sites like Lascaux and Chauvet, suggest that cavemen saw art as a bridge between the human and the spiritual, a way of ensuring harmony with the unseen world. Burial practices also reveal how deeply spiritual the cavemen were. Graves discovered from the Ice Age show bodies carefully arranged, sometimes with tools, ornaments, or animal bones placed beside them. These offerings suggest a belief in an afterlife, a continuation of existence beyond death. To bury a hunter with a spear or a woman with beads made of shells was to equip them for a journey that extended past the physical world. Fire may have given warmth and life, but ritual gave comfort in death, assuring the living that their loved ones traveled onward rather than vanishing into nothingness. Rituals often centered on fire itself. The flame was sacred. It offered protection from predators, light in the darkness, and heat for survival. Around the fire, chants, dances, and ceremonies unfolded. Shamans, spiritual leaders believed to hold special knowledge, guided these rituals. They were healers, storytellers, and mediators between the human and spiritual worlds. Shamans might wear animal skins, antlers, or masks to embody the spirits they sought to contact, blurring the line between man and beast, between reality and vision. In trance states, reached through rhythmic drumming, chanting, or the use of herbs, they claimed to travel to spirit worlds, bringing back guidance for clan. Seasonal changes, especially the arrival of winter and spring, became anchors for ritual. When the first snow fell, clans gathered to perform ceremonies meant to ensure survival through the cold months. They might scatter pieces of food into the fire as offerings, asking for abundance. When spring returned, dances celebrated rebirth, fertility, and the return of game animals. These seasonal rituals mirrored the rhythms of nature, embedding the clan's life into the cycles of the earth. Symbols also played a role in spiritual life. Carvings on bones, abstract shapes on cave walls, and personal ornaments crafted from shells or teeth often carried meanings beyond decoration. A necklace of animal teeth could symbolize protection, courage, or the blessing of the animal spirit. Red ochre, often used in burials, may have symbolized blood, life, or rebirth, connecting the dead with the cycle of existence. Even the act of painting itself was sacred, transforming cave walls into sanctuaries where the human and the divine met. Ritual practices also bound clans together socially. Shared ceremonies reinforced unity, reminding individuals that they were part of something greater than themselves. A lone hunter might fear the spirit of a slain animal, but when the entire clan participated in a ritual feast, fear turned into confidence, shared responsibility, and collective strength. These spiritual gatherings also offered moments of joy, music, and storytelling, lifting spirits during times when hunger and cold pressed heavily on daily life. Fear, however, was always intertwined with faith. Natural disasters, disease, or unexpected death often gave rise to rituals of protection. A sudden storm might be seen as the anger of a spirit, requiring offerings or chants to calm it. Illness might be treated not only with herbs, but also with ceremonies led by shamans who sought to expel harmful forces. In these ways, spiritual practices provided psychological relief, giving people a sense of control in a world that often seemed uncontrollable. The link between spirituality and survival was direct. Beliefs dictated hunting behavior, burial customs, and social rules. Rituals shaped when and how clans moved, what animals they pursued, and how they divided food. Spiritual leaders, by interpreting dreams and omens, influenced decisions that could determine the fate of the entire community. Faith was not separate from life. It was woven into every choice, every breath. Looking back, these spiritual beliefs and rituals reveal the roots of religion, myth, and culture. They were the first attempts to answer timeless questions. Why are we here? What happens after death? How do we live in harmony with forces beyond our control? Though primitive in form, these practices laid the groundwork for the spiritual traditions that would emerge millennia later. In the flicker of cave fires and the hush of burial grounds, humanity first reached beyond survival, seeking meaning in mystery. For the cavemen, spirituality was a compass pointing toward hope. It gave courage before the hunt, comfort in death, and unity in life. In a world ruled by cold, hunger, and uncertainty, ritual and belief warmed the human heart as surely as fire warmed the human body. And though thousands of years have passed, the echoes of those first ceremonies remain with us still. In our art, our symbols, our prayers, and our endless search for meaning. In the prehistoric world, life was not lived in isolation. Cavemen were not solitary wanderers, but members of clans, groups bound by kinship, cooperation, and the instinct to survive together. Yet where cooperation brought strength, conflict was never far away. Scarce resources, territorial disputes, and rival clans competing for hunting grounds often tested the fragile balance between peace and war. In the long winters especially, when food grew scarce and desperation rose, the bonds of community could either protect a group or push it into dangerous confrontation. Cooperation lay at the heart of clan survival. To bring down a mammoth or defend against predators, cavemen needed numbers, coordination, and trust. Hunts were carefully organized, with scouts identifying prey, hunters driving animals toward traps, and others lying in wait to strike. Without cooperation, such feats would have been impossible. Each member of the clan had a role: hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, firekeepers, and caretakers of children. Even the elderly, though unable to hunt, offered wisdom, memory, and guidance, keeping knowledge alive through stories and teaching. Cooperation meant that no single life stood alone. Survival was a shared responsibility, and failure by one could endanger all. Yet this unity was constantly challenged by conflict. Clans did not live in an empty world. Other groups roamed the same valleys and forests, seeking the same animals, rivers, and caves. Territory meant survival, and competition over it could ignite violence. Imagine a group of hunters returning to find another clan settled near their cave or tracking the same herd of reindeer across the frozen plain. Negotiation might sometimes resolve such tensions, but often survival instincts led to clashes. Weapons crafted for hunting, spears, clubs, and stone blades, were also used in battle. Archaeological evidence of broken bones, skull injuries, and mass graves suggests that violent encounters were not rare. Conflict, however, was not always total war. Cavemen understood, even without formal language, that endless fighting endangered everyone. Ritualized displays of strength, intimidation, or symbolic gestures may have served as substitutes for outright battle. Just as animals performed threat displays before fighting, humans too likely used noise, fire, or dramatic body paint to warn rivals away. Cooperation within a clan was therefore balanced by competition with outsiders, a dynamic that shaped both survival strategies and social identity. Inside the clan, conflict also emerged in smaller, more personal ways. Leadership, for example, was rarely absolute. Authority came from proven skill. Perhaps a successful hunter, a wise elder, or a shaman with spiritual influence. But disagreements were inevitable. Who would lead the hunt? Who decided when to migrate? How should food be divided when supplies ran low? In harsh winters, when every bite mattered, disputes could turn bitter. To resolve such tensions, clans relied on shared traditions, storytelling, and rituals that reinforced unity. Myths of ancestors or spirits may have reminded them that survival depended not on selfishness, but on solidarity. The balance between cooperation and conflict extended into family structures. Mates and children bound clans together, but they also created rivalries, especially among males competing for partners. Anthropologists believe that gift-giving, displays of strength, or hunting success often influenced who gained respect and mates within the group. Conflict within families was dangerous, for it threatened the cohesion of the entire clan. Thus, rituals, customs, and unwritten rules helped regulate relationships, maintaining a fragile peace where jealousy or greed could otherwise destroy unity. Winter intensified both sides of this balance. Cooperation became more vital as hunting grew dangerous and food scarcer. Clans relied heavily on shared work, gathering firewood, preserving meat, or guarding the cave entrance against wolves. A lone individual stood no chance in such conditions. At the same time, scarcity increased the risk of conflict. If one member was seen as taking more than their share, resentment could grow quickly. Harsh environments exposed the best and worst of humanity. Generosity in sharing the last bite of meat, or violence when desperation broke bonds of trust. Allies, too, played a role in survival. Some clans may have formed temporary pacts, sharing resources or joining in large hunts that required more people than a single group could muster. Such cooperation between groups could reduce conflict and increase survival chances. Yet these alliances were fragile, built on mutual need rather than deep trust. When food ran short again, yesterday's allies could become tomorrow's rivals. Over time, conflict and cooperation shaped not just survival, but evolution. Cooperation rewarded empathy, communication, and planning. Those who could work together thrived. Conflict, meanwhile, sharpened the need for defense, strategy, and resilience. Together, these forces pushed early humans toward greater intelligence, adaptability, and social complexity. The duality of conflict and cooperation defined the human story. Around the fire, laughter, songs, and shared meals bonded clans in peace. But out in the frozen plains, shadows of rivals and threats from predators reminded them that survival was never guaranteed. In this tension, cavemen learned lessons that echo through human history. The need to balance self-interest with the good of the group, the dangers of division, and the strength found in unity. For the cavemen, survival was never just about tools, fire, or food. It was about people, how they worked together, how they resolved disputes, and how they defended what they loved. In the cold silence of winter nights, the fate of each clan was written not only in the snow and stars, but also in a fragile balance between conflict and cooperation. For cavemen, the landscape was not just a backdrop. It was an arena of survival, challenge, and opportunity. Life was tied to the rhythms of nature, and as seasons shifted or game herds moved, so too did the clans. Migration was not a choice born of curiosity, but necessity, a strategy for survival in a world where food, warmth, and safety were never guaranteed in one place for long. Winter especially forced these movements, pushing groups out of frozen valleys, across icy rivers, and over treacherous mountains in search of kinder lands where life could be sustained. The decision to migrate was often driven by the animals themselves. Reindeer, bison, mammoths, and other large prey moved in great seasonal patterns, chasing fresh grazing grounds. To lose track of these migrations meant hunger and possible starvation. Clans learned to follow the trails, observing signs in the land and sky. They understood the direction of winds, the changing behavior of animals, and even the flight of birds as clues for where to go next. Migration was thus both a physical journey and an act of deep observation, a dialogue between humans and the natural world. Travel, however, was fraught with danger. Clans carried their world with them: tools, hides, fire-making kits, and precious food reserves. Children and elders slowed the pace, forcing the group to move carefully. Rivers had to be crossed with rafts of logs or by wading through icy waters, each crossing a gamble with life. Mountains presented their own hazards: rock slides, avalanches, and the constant threat of exposure. Even the flat plains were perilous, offering little cover from predators or rival clans. Every step forward was marked by risk, but remaining in place often meant certain death. Shelter during migration was temporary and improvised. Lean-tos made of branches, animal hides stretched over wooden frames, or simple windbreaks of stone offered short-term protection. Fires were carried like treasures, embers carefully kept alive in bundles of moss or bark, ready to be rekindled at the next stop. For children born into this lifestyle, movement became as natural as breathing. Home was not a fixed place, but wherever the clan rested under the stars. Encounters with other groups added another layer of tension. Migration paths often overlapped, bringing clans into contact with strangers. Sometimes, these meetings led to conflict, as both groups competed for resources or shelter. Other times, necessity fostered cooperation, trading tools, sharing stories, or even merging groups for greater strength. Such encounters expanded the web of human interaction, slowly shaping culture and exchange across vast regions. Migration also demanded memory. Elders recalled where herds had passed in years before, where caves offered reliable shelter, and which rivers froze solid enough to cross safely. These oral maps, passed down through generations, guided clans across unfamiliar terrain. Stories, chants, and rituals carried knowledge in ways that could not be forgotten, ensuring that the paths of survival remained alive in memory even as landscapes shifted. But not all journeys ended in safety. Many clans perished along the way, undone by storms, starvation, or ambushes. The bones of those who fell became silent markers on migration routes, reminders of the cost of movement. To survive, others pressed on, carrying grief with them like a shadow, their footsteps driven by the unrelenting call of survival. Over generations, these migrations reshaped humanity itself. Following herds and chasing warmer lands led clans out Africa into Europe, Asia, and eventually across continents. Step by step, driven by cold winters and fleeting prey, humans spread across the globe. What began as survival journeys became the foundation of exploration, adaptation, and expansion, setting the stage for all of human history to follow. The duality of migration was clear. It was both hardship and hope. Every departure meant leaving behind familiar ground, facing unknown dangers and risking lives. Yet every journey also carried the promise of food, warmth, and renewal. In winter, when caves grew cold and fires dimmed, migration was the act of refusing defeat, of seeking life in a world that often seemed determined to take it away. For cavemen, migration was not just movement through space, but a rhythm of existence. It was a pulse of survival, the constant reminder that life meant motion. In their footsteps across frozen valleys and windswept plains lies the story of humanity's resilience, its courage to walk into the unknown, and its endless search for a place to call home, even if only for a season. For cavemen, survival was never guaranteed, not only because of the cold or hunger, but because the world around them was filled with predators that stalked the same landscapes they call home: wolves, cave lions, saber-toothed cats, hyenas, and even massive bears ruled the Ice Age plains and forests. To step out of the safety of firelight was to step into their world. Every hunt, every migration, and every gathering trip carried with it the possibility of confrontation. In such encounters, fear and courage stood side by side, and the line between life and death was often razor thin. Predators were both rivals and teachers. Cavemen studied their movements closely, learning where they hunted, how they tracked prey, and when they rested. Observing wolves chasing reindeer or lions ambushing bison taught humans lessons about patience, stealth, and cooperation. Yet this knowledge came at a price, for predators did not only hunt animals, they hunted humans, too. Archaeological evidence shows marks of lion and hyena teeth on human bones, grim reminders that in the prehistoric food chain, early humans were not always at the top. To defend themselves, clans relied on fire as their first shield. The glow of flames kept many predators at bay, their instinctive fear of smoke and heat creating a protective circle in the darkness. Campsites were carefully chosen near cliffs, rivers, or caves that could be defended easily, and fires were maintained through the night to ward off prowlers. Yet predators were cunning. A starving wolf pack might linger just beyond the firelight, waiting for a careless moment, while lions, bold and silent, could strike at dawn when embers grew weak. Weapons gave cavemen a second layer of defense. Spears tipped with sharpened stone, heavy clubs, and later atlatl for launching projectiles, turned human hands into tools of survival. Still, confronting predators directly was perilous. A charging bear or a sudden lion attack could overwhelm even the bravest hunters. Cooperation again became vital. A single person might fall, but united clans shouting, throwing stones, and brandishing fire could turn even the fiercest predator away. Fear transformed into strength when the group acted as one. The dangers of predators shaped daily life. Women gathering plants and children playing near camp always remained alert. Lookouts may have been posted during hunts, watching for signs of prowling beasts. Even caves, though offering shelter, were not always safe. Some were already home to bears or hyenas. Entering a new cave meant risk, and the bones found in many prehistoric shelters tell stories of fatal encounters with territorial animals unwilling to give up their lairs. Predators also influenced spiritual beliefs. To face a lion or a bear was to confront raw power, a force of nature embodied in flesh. Many clans likely revered these creatures, painting their images on cave walls, wearing their teeth or claws as ornaments, and incorporating their spirits into rituals. The act of killing such an animal may have been seen as not only survival, but also a sacred moment, a victory that required offerings or ceremonies to honor the spirit of the fallen beast. Winter sharpened these encounters. As snow deepened and prey animals grew scarce, predators became bolder, hungrier, and more desperate. Packs of wolves howled through the night, testing the resolve of clans huddled in caves. Hyenas prowled the edges of camps, scavenging scraps, but always ready to strike at the weak. A journey for firewood or water in such times became a gamble, forcing individuals to weigh necessity against danger. These struggles reminded cavemen that winter was not only a battle against the elements, but also against the creatures that shared their frozen world. Yet predators were not only threats, they were competitors. Humans and wolves, for example, both hunted the same animals. This rivalry eventually turned into cooperation when early humans began forming bonds with wolves, domesticating them into the first dogs. But before trust was built, there was tension, a long period where wolves might stalk humans as easily as humans stalked wolves. Out of danger grew one of humanity's most enduring partnerships, but its beginnings were forged in fear. The constant presence of predators honed human senses. Sharp ears, quick reflexes, and keen eyes became essential traits, passed from one generation to the next. Children learned from an early age to recognize the sound of cracking branches, the distant growl carried by the wind, or the way birds suddenly took flight, a language of warning signs that could mean the difference between survival and death. This vigilance created a mindset of awareness that defined daily life. In the end, encounters with predators were reminders of humanity's fragile place in the natural order. Cavemen were hunters, but they were also hunted. The daily dance with danger shaped their culture, tools, and psychology. It taught them humility in the face of greater strength, but also courage in the power of unity. Around fires at night, stories of close escapes and legendary battles with beasts were told and retold, becoming part of the oral tradition that bound clans together. For the cavemen, predators were not just enemies. They were challenges that demanded respect, rivals that forced humans to grow sharper, stronger, and more united. And though thousands of years separate us from that time, echoes of those encounters remain in our myths, our fears, and even our admiration for the wild creatures that still walk the earth. In those ancient winters, survival meant not only enduring the cold, but also standing firm against the gleaming eyes that watched from the darkness. In the prehistoric world, survival was never the work of hunters alone. While the image of cavemen often centers on men chasing mammoths with spears, the truth of daily life was far more complex and far more balanced. Women and children played essential roles, particularly during the long winters when every contribution meant the difference between life and death. Their efforts, though quieter than the clash of hunts, sustained the heartbeat of clan and ensured that knowledge, resources, and traditions passed from one generation to the next. Women were gatherers, keepers of fire, makers of clothing, and often healers. During winter, when plants were scarce, their role in food preparation became critical. They preserved dried meat, rendered fat into nutrient-rich supplies, and knew how to stretch resources to last as long as possible. Bones and hides left from hunts were never wasted. Women turned them into tools, sewing needles, containers, or warm coverings. The careful work of fashioning clothing from furs and hides was no less vital than spears in the hunt. A poorly clothed clan could freeze, even if food was abundant. Fire, the most precious ally in winter, was often managed by women. Keeping the flame alive through long nights required vigilance. They shielded embers from drafts, fed them with stored wood, and rekindled them when flames waned. In many clans, the fire was treated as sacred, and its guardians carried not only responsibility, but also respect. To lose fire in the depths of winter was a disaster, one that could force an entire clan to risk everything by seeking flames elsewhere. Thus, the keepers of fire held lives in their hands. Women also played a central role in healing. They gathered herbs, roots, and natural medicines, passing knowledge of plants from mother to daughter. In winter, when illness struck easily and injuries healed slowly, such knowledge was priceless. A poultice to ease infection, a tea to calm fever, or a ritual chant to lift despair, all helped keep the clan alive and unified. Healing was not just physical, but spiritual, for women often assisted shamans in rituals that soothed fear and gave hope. Children, though small, were not passive in survival. From an early age, they learned by watching, imitating, and listening. Boys and girls alike practiced with small tools, carried wood, gathered kindling, and helped scrape hides. Tasks were adjusted to their size, but not dismissed as unimportant. Carrying even a few sticks of wood or helping to tend a small fire eased a burden on adults. More importantly, these tasks trained them for the responsibilities they would shoulder as adults. Survival was a lifelong apprenticeship, begun in childhood and never truly finished. The presence of children also shaped the psychology of clans. They were symbols of continuity, reminders that life extended beyond the present struggle. In the darkest winters, laughter or play within the cave may have offered a spark of joy, a break from fear and hunger. Parents protected children fiercely, teaching them caution. Never wander far. Beware predators. Stay near the fire. Yet they also encouraged courage, allowing them to test their skills in safe ways, preparing them for the day when survival would depend on their strength. Women and children also played roles in storytelling. Long winter nights were filled with tales told by elders, and children learned the myths, hunting lessons, and spiritual traditions that bound the clan together. Women often passed down songs, chants, and oral knowledge, weaving culture into memory. These stories were not entertainment alone. They were maps of survival, teaching where herds once roamed, which caves held safety, and how ancestors had endured winters past. Socially, the role of women and children reinforced unity. Clans were not built only on strength, but also on nurture, care, and continuity. A hunter might bring down a beast, but without those who prepared, preserved, and distributed the meat, the kill meant little. A spear might defend against predators, but without warm clothing sewn by careful hands, the hunter himself would freeze. Children's training and participation reminded everyone of the future they fought to protect. Winter intensified the value of these contributions. When hunting failed or whether trapped clans inside caves for days, it was the skills of women, making bone broth, stretching hides, keeping embers alive, that carried the clan through. Children, too, learned resilience in these moments, discovering how to endure hunger, fear, and boredom. These lessons hardened them, preparing a new generation to continue the cycle of survival. The balance of roles also reduced conflict within the clan. While men risked their lives in the hunt, women ensured that the rewards were preserved and shared. This balance of danger and care, of outward strength and inward resourcefulness, created stability. It prevented survival from resting on one fragile foundation. Instead, the clan became like a woven net, where every strand, man, woman, or child, added strength to the whole. Looking back, the survival of humanity through Ice Age winters was not simply the story of hunters and warriors. It was a story of mothers sewing by firelight, children gathering twigs in the snow, elders teaching by story, and families working as one. The unseen labor of women and the growing efforts of children were as essential as the bravery of hunters, and together they formed a complete circle of survival. For cavemen, winter survival was never a single act of strength, but a symphony of roles, each vital in its own way. Women and children were not background figures. They were the steady rhythm that allowed the clan to endure. In the warmth of their care, the continuity of their knowledge, and the spark of their laughter, humanity found not only survival but also meaning. Among all the forces of nature that shaped the lives of early humans, fire stood apart as both a practical tool and a profound symbol. For cavemen, fire was more than a source of light and warmth. It was a companion, a guardian, and a spiritual presence that defined their existence. To grasp how deeply fire influenced their culture, one must look beyond its immediate utility and see how it became woven into their rituals, beliefs, and daily survival. Fire was first and foremost a shield against the darkness. In the prehistoric world, night carried dangers that were both real and imagined. Predators prowled in the shadows, and the cold could kill as surely as claws and teeth. Fire pushed back the night, casting a protective circle around the clan. The flickering flames provided not only safety, but also a sense of psychological comfort. Within its glow, fear receded, and the unknown wilderness beyond became distant. This protection gave fire an aura of magic, as if it were alive, guarding the fragile lives of those who depended on it. Equally vital was fire's ability to transform food. Before fire, raw meat was chewed with difficulty, often carrying parasites or sickness. With fire, food became easier to eat, safer, and more nourishing. Cooking changed not only the diet, but the very biology of humans, allowing them to extract more energy from meals. This transformation would not have gone unnoticed by cavemen, who must have viewed fire as a powerful ally that turned what was dangerous into something life-giving. The act of cooking itself may have been seen as a sacred ritual, where raw became safe and the clan's survival was ensured. But fire's role was not confined to practical. In the glow of flames, stories were told, songs were sung, and rituals were performed. Fire became the heart of the social circle, a gathering point where knowledge was passed down and traditions were preserved. The dance of shadows on cave walls created images that blur reality and imagination, inspiring myths and early forms of art. It is no coincidence that some of the oldest cave paintings were found near hearths. Fire not only illuminated their art, but also gave it spiritual meaning. Symbolically, fire represented life itself. Its constant need for fuel mirrored human hunger. Its fragility, easily extinguished by wind or neglect, reminded them of their own mortality. To tend fire was to nurture existence, and to lose it was akin to losing hope. Thus, keeping fire alive became a sacred responsibility. Many clans entrusted women or elders with this role, treating the flame as if it were another member of the group, one that demanded care and respect. There is evidence to suggest that fire held ritualistic significance as well. Shamans or spiritual leaders likely incorporated fire into ceremonies, seeing it as a bridge between the human world and the spirit realm. The rising smoke may have been interpreted as a messenger to the skies, carrying prayers to unseen forces. Flames could cleanse, purify, and even transform objects used in rituals. Charred bones, ashes, or burned offerings may have symbolized a cycle of life and death, a theme that fire embodied with perfect clarity. It consumed, but also created. Fire also shaped the rhythm of time. Before its mastery, humans lived according to the sun, retreating when darkness fell. With fire, night gained new purpose. Time around the flames was devoted to teaching, planning hunts, or strengthening bonds within the clan. Fire expanded the boundaries of human activity, allowing imagination and community to flourish in ways that mere daylight could not. This extension of time gave humanity an advantage, not just in survival, but in cultural growth. The symbolic weight of fire also carried into gender and generational roles. In many prehistoric societies, men sought danger outside, hunting and facing the wilderness, while women often guarded the flame inside, ensuring continuity. Fire thus became associated with nurture, constancy, and home. For children, watching adults tend to fire was an initiation into responsibility. Learning how to feed, protect, and transport fire was one of the first serious lessons in survival. To hold an ember in a small clay bowl or a burning stick was to hold the future of the clan itself. The mythology of fire likely grew from these associations. Perhaps stories arose of how fire was stolen from the heavens, gifted by animals, or discovered through lightning. These myths not only explain the mystery of its origin, but reinforce its sacredness. Fire was not simply a tool found in nature. It was a treasure bestowed, one that required reverence. Even the act of creating fire through friction or striking stones may have carried ceremonial meaning, as if humans were invoking divine power each time sparks appeared. On a deeper level, fire became a metaphor for the human spirit. Like fire, humans could adapt, endure, and spread across the harshest environments. The warmth of flames mirrored the warmth of family bonds, while the destructive power of fire echoed the dangers of anger or conflict. Cavemen may not have articulated these parallels in words, but their rituals, myths, and practices reflected an intuitive recognition that fire was more than physical. It was symbolic of existence itself. During winters, fire's symbolism became even stronger. In the bitter cold, the fire represented life's last line of defense. A single flame could mean survival for an entire group. The reverence for fire deepened in these moments, for its loss in midwinter would have been catastrophic. Thus, fire was not only warmth, but also destiny, a reminder that survival balanced on a fragile spark. In the long story of humanity, fire marked a turning point. It gave cavemen mastery over their environment in a way no other force could. But its true legacy lay not only in survival, but in meaning. Fire became a companion in darkness, a teacher in ritual, and a symbol of the human journey itself. Fragile yet powerful, destructive yet creative, earthly yet divine. For cavemen, fire was never just flames on wood. It was a heartbeat of their culture, the symbol of their resilience, and the light that carried them forward through endless winters and into the dawn of civilization. The story of cavemen does not end in the caves where they once huddled against the winter cold. Their legacy has carried forward, etched into our bodies, minds, and cultures. The instincts that guided them through the harshest of environments still whisper within us, shaping how we think, how we live, and how we seek safety in a world far removed from their icy nights. To understand this legacy is to realize that cavemen are not relics of the past. They live on within us, in ways both subtle and profound. One of the clearest remnants of their survival lies in our biology. The human body still carries adaptations forged in prehistoric winters. The tendency to store fat, the shivering reflex, and even our craving for calorie-rich foods are echoes of a time when energy meant survival. Seasonal depression and the need for sunlight also tie back to ancient rhythms when light was scarce and fire was sacred. Though we now live in heated homes, the memory of scarcity remains coded in our DNA. Our social instincts, too, bear the marks of those ancient nights. Cavemen relied on their clans for warmth, protection, and the sharing of resources. The drive to belong, to form communities, and a bond over shared meals stems from this period of dependence. Around modern dinner tables and campfires on hiking trips, or even in the glow of a television, we recreate the circles of warmth and storytelling that once defined their survival. What once was a necessity has become tradition, ritual, and comfort. Even our myths and religions carry threads of prehistoric survival. The symbolism of fire, light versus darkness, an eternal struggle between life and death echo in countless spiritual traditions. The reverence for the sun, the fear of endless winter, and the belief in protective spirits can all be traced back to the anxieties and hopes of people who lived at the edge of extinction. The great cycles of nature, birth, death, and rebirth were not abstract concepts to them but daily realities. These ideas flowed into myth, shaping the foundations of human culture that still guide us today. On a psychological level, the legacy of fear remains powerful. The instinctive dread of the dark, the primal unease of silence in a forest, or the shiver of cold wind against our skin are reminders of dangers our ancestors could never afford to ignore. These fears, though often irrational in the modern world, were once vital warnings. They kept the clan alive, sharpening their senses against predators and harsh climates. What now feels like anxiety was, in its origin, survival intelligence. Technology, too, finds its roots in their struggles. The mastery of fire, the crafting of stone tools, and the building of shelters laid the foundation for the innovation that defines humanity today. Every skyscraper, every heater, every stove is a distant descendant of those first sparks struck from stone. The survival techniques of cavemen became the first steps on a journey that would one day lead us to shape entire continents. Yet, despite this progress, the fundamental goals remain the same: to stay warm to find food and to ensure the survival of our kin. In modern survivalist culture, the fascination with primitive skills reflects a longing to reconnect with that raw resilience. People still learn to make fire without matches, to build shelters from natural materials, and to hunt or forage in the wild. These practices are not just hobbies. They are an attempt to step back into the world of our ancestors, to feel what it meant to depend on skill and instinct alone. They remind us of a truth we often forget, that our comforts rest upon fragile layers, and beneath them lies the same struggle that once defined human life. Cavemen also left us with lessons in resilience and adaptability. They faced winters with limited tools, uncertain hunts, and relentless danger, yet they endured. Their story is one of patience, cooperation, and determination. Modern humanity, despite its technological advances, still faces challenges: climate change, resource scarcity, global crises, that echo the struggles of those early clans. Their ability to adapt, to innovate, and to come together offers a timeless model for survival. Yet the legacy of cavemen is not only about hardship, it is also about creativity and imagination. Around those ancient fires, early humans painted on cave walls, sang songs, and crafted myths. They turn survival into meaning, transforming necessity into culture. This ability to weave beauty and story out of struggle remains one of humanity's greatest gifts. From art galleries to literature, from cinema to oral traditions, we are still telling stories around the fire. Only now the flames are digital screens, and the caves are our homes. There is also a deeper philosophical legacy, the awareness of fragility. Cavemen lived close to extinction, always one failed hunt or one harsh winter away from death. This closeness to the edge shaped a profound respect for life, a reverence for the cycles of nature. In our modern abundance, it is easy to forget this humility, but the reminders remain. Natural disasters, power outages, and sudden crises can still reduce us to the same vulnerability. In those moments, the lessons of our ancestors resurface. Share warmth, gather together, and protect the flame. Ultimately, the legacy of caveman survival is a reminder that we are part of an unbroken chain. The blood in our veins, the instincts in our minds, and the traditions in our cultures all flow from those who endured the coldest nights. Their resilience became our inheritance. Their fears became our instincts. Their triumphs became the foundation of our civilizations. As we look back on their world, we realize that the cavemen were not primitive strangers. They were the first chapters of ourselves. Every time we light a fire, share a meal, or gather in the warmth of community, we echo their survival. And though our winters may now be lit by electricity and warmed by central heating, the spirit of those ancient survivors still burns within us, as steady and enduring as the flames they once guarded through the endless cold.